Well, good morning. So this morning, I prepared a little script about a book I picked up. I picked up a discarded library book called Ethics, The Essential Writings, edited with an introduction by Gordon Marino, part of the Modern Library Classics. And the first half of it is, the philosophers you'd probably be familiar with. The second half is modern philosophers. And so that's what I found interesting. Not many, but some of the modern philosophers, their philosophies are going to need to be reevaluated because, the writing's on the wall. And once they've been weighed, they'll be found wanting. Many people like me are reevaluating many of these thinkers, but broadly, that takes a while. So, on that, here is the podcast, Reevaluating Ethics, a 15-year reflection on modern philosophy. So, welcome to the podcast. Today, we're going to dig into some big ideas in philosophy and challenge some modern assumptions, look at the timeless questions of human values and morality. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a fascinating book, Ethics, The Essential Writings, published about 15 years ago. This collection features both classical and modern thinkers. But time and perspective have shown us that many of the modern philosophers collected here may be a little wanting. So first, Mary Midgley, pardon me if I've mispronounced, Mary Midgley and Cultural Misunderstandings. Let's start with Mary Midgley's essay, Trying Out One's New Sword, where she looks at cultural values and how we judge other societies' practices. She writes about the Japanese practice of cross-cutting with swords, a test of the blade's sharpness and strength, and that supposedly used wayfarers or passers-by. But here's the thing. Historical accounts show that it wasn't wayfarers, but criminals or prisoners, and usually there were bodies, not even a living person, that were typically used. This difference isn't just a minor historical error. It reveals how, even in her argument against judging other cultures, Midgley risks oversimplifying or misrepresenting them. She reminds us not to judge the other too quickly, but ironically, her own assumptions reflect a kind of Western romanticism. Japan's code of honor, for example, is often misinterpreted. In reality, it isn't about a blind obedience or mysticism. It's a commitment to craftsmanship, duty, and responsibility. Here, Midgley's example doesn't just misrepresent history, but highlights how easily we can misunderstand each other, and even when we try not to. I apologize, but the misinterpretation wasn't just that she claims that they used just strangers, passers-by, to test their swords, but she claims that they tested him because it would cause dishonor to the swordsman and his ancestors and maybe to the emperor. I mean, that's ridiculous. It would cause dishonor in the sense that, if you're a swordsman, you should be able to use your sword properly. And if you're a craftsman, your sword should be properly made. That's where the dishonor would come from. So again, this not judging other cultures, but she is absolutely contextualizing another culture based on her own and completely misunderstanding it. So, next section is Sartre and the problem of philosophical consistency. Now let's turn to Sartre. His essay, Existentialism and the Human Emotions, or Existentialism and Human Emotions, is often praised for its focus on human freedom and responsibility. He poses a striking dilemma. Should he join the resistance during the Nazi occupation of France or stay home to care for his mother? Sartre argues that we each bear the weight of our own choices, that there is no moral script to follow, just individual responsibility. Yet, Sartre himself faced criticism for being inconsistent, especially later in life when he seemed more committed to abstract ideals than to grounded action. By embracing Marxism, for example, he drifted away from his own existentialist ideals of individual freedom. We are left with a tension. Sartre's call for personal responsibility is powerful, but in his own life he struggled to live up to it. In section 3, Camus' consistency and human-centered morality. In contrast, Albert Camus offers a different model of moral philosophy. Camus' humanism focused on compassion, solidarity, and the inherent dignity of each person, which he argued should be at the center of any ethical system. He took a clear stance against violent revolution and emphasized practical action. In The Rebel, he criticizes both the oppressor and the violent revolutionary, seeing both as perpetuating cycles of suffering. Unlike Sartre, who often appeared as an abstract idealist, Camus acted in line with his philosophy, joining the French resistance and later working against injustices in both France and Algeria. Camus' focus on empathy, shared humanity, and moral consistency makes him a kind of ethical touchstone. His lived example shows that philosophy isn't just a theory, it's about choices, action, and the courage to stand by one's values. Section 4, Postmodernism and the Crisis of Meaning. Some would call the crisis of knowing. I could even say it the crisis of being, the crisis of self, the crisis of I and thou. Fast forward to postmodernism. Postmodern figures like Foucault and Derrida. They challenge traditional ways of thinking, deconstructing systems of power, and questioning the truths we take for granted. But their ideas often seem morally ambiguous, detached from clear ethical commitments. For example, Foucault's exploration of power relations offers insight into how institutions shape society's values, but critics argue that by focusing so much on the mechanics of power, Foucault sometimes sidesteps questions of individual responsibility. This creates a distance from concrete ethical commitments where moral clarity seems more like a mirage than a goal. And I want to point that Foucault very significantly misunderstood Friedrich Nietzsche. And Foucault himself was very morally ambiguous, ethically ambiguous as a human being as well. Was engaged in very questionable activities on a personal level. And I've talked about this before. It doesn't mean you need to throw out all of their philosophy. But if they're like Sartre and Foucault, if their life challenges what they say is their philosophy, well, it just does not sit. That is an oxymoron that, as I said, most humans cannot keep two conflicting ideas in their head at once. And so leaves us to question. As I said, the writing is on the wall in those cases. So section 5, Nietzsche's call for reevaluation, not destruction. So now this brings us to Nietzsche, often misinterpreted as the father of postmodernism. Nietzsche's will to power wasn't a call to tear down every belief, but a call to constantly reevaluate them. For Nietzsche, the aim wasn't to deny truth. The aim wasn't to deny truth, but to re-examine it continually, refining it through our struggles and challenges. He argues that ethical growth requires ongoing questioning in evolution, not an endpoint. Remember that Scientio in Latin is Wissenschaft in German, which is to come to understand. This process, lost my place. I hate how bad they are at this. Okay, section 2, section 5. So it's for Nietzsche, the aim wasn't to deny truth, but to re-examine it continually, refining it through our struggles and challenges. He argued that ethical growth requires ongoing questioning, an evolution, not an endpoint. This process of reevaluation isn't about undermining meaning, but about engaging in a living, breathing philosophy. Lucretius once wrote that life is one long struggle in the dark. That's omnis cum tenebris praesertum vita leveret. Nietzsche, too, believed that wrestling with ideas and values was how we move towards light. It's an ongoing journey, a continuous act of creation and revision. So, what's the takeaway? In a world where postmodern philosophy often leans towards destruction and worse, Nietzsche and perhaps Camus offer something else, a philosophy of creation, of reevaluation, and ultimately of responsibility that leads to meaning and value in creation, the Schätzen in German. They remind us that ethics isn't just about ideas, it's about our daily choices, our relationships, ich and du of Buber. It's an I and a thou, not an I and an it. And our courage to face the world openly, our authenticity, as Nietzsche called for, and what resonates throughout Carl Jung's philosophy, this idea that true individuation comes within the complex of self and other and society and meaning and understanding. So it truly is an interaction, an authentic interaction with the world, with ourselves, and with each other, that we truly come to understand the world, each other, and ourselves. So now, 15 years after Ethics, the Essential Writings, was published, we find that the ideas of Camus, Nietzsche, and perhaps a reinterpreted Sartre seem to hold up. Ethics grounded in responsibility, empathy, and a continuous reevaluation of values. Our task, then, isn't to destroy our beliefs, but to refine them, as Camus did, with a commitment to both truth and compassion. So thanks for listening. Join us next time as we continue exploring how philosophy can still illuminate our modern world, and how I argue that it's just one of the many sciences that we call life. So thank you for joining me, and I hope this finds you well, and thank you for listening.